The host wanted to make an example out of Stallone. Instead, he became the perfect example of why people don't trust mainstream media anymore. The studio lights were bright, too bright, the kind that made people sweat even if they weren't nervous. But Sylvester Stallone wasn't nervous. He sat back in his chair, legs apart, shoulders relaxed, waiting. The audience murmured in anticipation, some clutching their phones, ready to record. They knew something was about to happen. Across from Stallone sat Ethan Caldwell, a polished, sharp-dressed TV host, known for his progressive slant and love of gotcha moments. Ethan leaned forward, a smug grin creeping across his face. He had interviewed politicians, activists, and Hollywood elites, always managing to make them stumble. But Stallone? That was new territory. "Mr. Stallone," Ethan began, his voice smooth and rehearsed, "you've always been a symbol of American toughness. But do you think that kind of masculinity is outdated? I mean, in today's world, don't you think we should redefine strength to be more inclusive?" A few audience members chuckled, some nodding in agreement. These were Ethan's fans, the kind who expected him to trap his guests in their own words. Stallone blinked slowly, deliberately. Then he leaned in, elbows on his knees, and exhaled through his nose. "You mean, do I think being tough is a bad thing now?" Ethan smirked. "Well, I think we're past the era where men need to punch their way through problems. Don't you think the world has moved on from that outdated thinking?" Silence, the kind that stretches just long enough to make people shift in their seats. Stallone scratched his chin, then laughed, a deep, genuine belly laugh. "You're serious," he finally said. "You think toughness is a problem?" Ethan straightened his tie. "I think it can be toxic when it discourages vulnerability, yes." Stallone nodded slowly, as if processing the comment. Then he leaned back, stretching his arms across the back of his chair. "Let me ask you something," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "If someone broke into your house tonight, do you want a tough guy in there? Or someone who's going to sit down and talk about their feelings?" The audience gasped. A few scattered claps followed. Ethan opened his mouth, but Stallone wasn't done. "See, toughness isn't about punching walls or yelling the loudest. It's about standing your ground when life knocks you down. It's about protecting your family. It's about discipline, respect, and hard work. And if you think the world doesn't need that anymore," Stallone shook his head, "then I don't know what world you're living in." Ethan forced a chuckle, but there was a flicker of hesitation behind his eyes. He hadn't expected Stallone to hit back so fast, but he wasn't giving up that easily. "All right," Ethan said, shifting in his seat, "but don't you think Hollywood, and let's be honest, your own movies, have glorified violence as the only solution to problems?" Stallone didn't hesitate. "Hollywood glorifies a lot of things. You ever seen a movie where a guy saves the world by filling out paperwork?" This time the laughter was real. Even some of Ethan's crew members smirked. But Ethan still had tricks up his sleeve. But Stallone, he was just getting warmed up. Ethan straightened his posture, adjusting the stack of cue cards on his lap like he was searching for the perfect counterpunch. He was good at this, controlling the tempo, leading his guests down a path where they had no choice but to stumble. But Stallone wasn't playing along. "All right, let's talk about influence," Ethan said, flipping through his notes. "You've built a career playing tough, no-nonsense characters, guys who solve problems with their fists, guns, or brute force. Do you ever think about the message that sends? Don't you feel a responsibility to promote a more progressive kind of hero?" The way Ethan emphasized progressive, just enough to let the audience know exactly where this was going, made Stallone smirk. He sat up, stretching his shoulders like a boxer preparing for the next round. "First of all," Stallone said, his voice steady, "I make movies. Movies aren't real. You know that, right?" He raised an eyebrow. "I mean, last time I checked, I never actually went 15 rounds with Apollo Creed, never took down a whole army with a red bandana and a knife, and never ran up those steps in Philly to fix the world's problems." A few people in the crowd laughed. Ethan stayed firm. "Sure," Ethan pressed, "but movies shape culture. Kids grow up watching Rambo and Rocky. Don't you think we should be giving them heroes who solve problems without violence?" Stallone exhaled through his nose. "Man, you ever seen Rocky? That whole movie was about getting back up when life knocks you down. It wasn't about beating people up. It was about heart, Perseverance. And Rambo? He shrugged. That guy was just trying to be left alone. If people had just let him walk through town and mind his business, none of that would have happened. The audience clapped, louder this time. Ethan's jaw clenched. This wasn't going the way he had planned. The audience clapped louder this time, and Ethan's jaw clenched. He knew he was losing control. Still, he tried one more angle, leaning forward with a softer tone. Okay, fair enough, Ethan said. But let's talk about the real world. In today's society, people are questioning what it means to be strong. Some might argue that your version of toughness, the old school, don't show weakness kind, creates more division than unity. What do you say to that? Stallone let the question hang for a moment. He tapped his fingers on the armrest, eyes locked on Ethan. You ever meet a firefighter? Stallone asked. Ethan blinked. Excuse me? A firefighter, a cop, a guy in the military. Hell, even a single mom working 2 jobs just to put food on the table. You ever talk to those people? You think toughness is their problem? Stallone shook his head. No, man. Their toughness is what keeps the world running. The problem isn't toughness. The problem is people thinking strength is dangerous. Weakness ain't a virtue. Strength with control. That's what keeps people safe. The energy in the room shifted. Ethan tried to cut in, but Stallone wasn't finished. You want to know the real problem? Stallone leaned forward, voice low and deliberate. It's people who talk about toughness like it's the enemy, while living in a world built and protected by tough people. He locked eyes with Ethan. If the world ever really goes sideways, you'll be glad guys like me are still around. Dead silence. The audience wasn't just listening anymore. They were on Stallone's side. Ethan swallowed, clearly rattled. He tried to rally with one more question. But don't you think society has changed? Maybe it's time to move forward and leave some of those old ideas behind. Stallone exhaled slowly. His tone shifted, calm, almost reflective. You ever see a building being torn down? Ethan hesitated. Yeah, I guess. It takes what? A few seconds to bring it down? A couple of charges, a button press, and boom, it's gone. But you ever watch one being built? Ethan didn't answer. That takes years. Brick by brick, steel by steel, men working day and night. The people with the detonators don't care about the work that went into it. They just want to see it come crashing down. The audience was locked in. You say moving forward, but where are we moving to? Change just for the sake of change doesn't mean progress. Sometimes you tear down something worth keeping without even realizing it. Ethan had nothing. No quip, no comeback. Just silence. When the interview ended, Ethan barely kept his professional smile intact. Stallone stood, stretched his shoulders, and gave a small wave to the audience before walking off like nothing had happened. But something had happened. The internet exploded. Within hours, clips of the interview were everywhere. Memes, reaction videos, even headlines like Stallone shuts down the media. The conversation had shifted. People weren't just debating Stallone's words. They were talking about toughness, resilience, and what it truly meant to be strong. And through it all, Stallone didn't say another word. He didn't have to, because sometimes real strength speaks for itself.